TikTok came to us in 2020, they had a concrete problem. These US advertisers didn't trust the content on their platform to be acceptable for their brand.
We usually tend to worry about AI giving incorrect answers.
You should worry about AI giving incorrect answers. And we were uniquely positioned to help solve that because of all the data science and machine learning and engineering and product we had built up until then for YouTube.
Hello everyone, welcome to Tuesdays with Trailblazers, brought to you by AdTech Edge, the video podcast where we bring you the latest trends and insights in advertising and technology. I'm your host Siddesh, and today we have with us Jon Morra, Chief AI Officer at Zefr. He's passionate about all things data and technology and speaks about these topics as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Jon. Hey Jon, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Likewise, Jon. We are really excited to see what wonderful insights you have for us. But before that, we would love to dive into your diverse career. I'm pretty sure there's a lot for our audiences to learn from your career trajectory, and I'd love for you to share any tips that you have for our audiences.
Sure. So, I've been in machine learning since before the term data science was in popular use, I think. Not AI is a lot older, but when I started my career in graduate school, I found that while I was in graduate school for biomedical engineering and I was doing machine learning methods for brain mapping, I really fell in love with the data portion and less the patient portion. Throughout my career, what I've really found is I love data and I love applying data to a diverse set of domains. So my career spans medicine, both in the private sector and the public sector. I did a stint at eHarmony where I oversaw algorithmic matchmaking, dynamic pricing, fraud modeling, and churn modeling. So machine learning for love. And certainly at advertising as well, right? I've been in a variety of different roles at Zefr, really trying to understand the nuance of what brands look at when they want to understand social media content. So my tip for the audience would be find your passion, and your passion may be verticalized or it may be, more broad like mine.
I mean, some real words of wisdom there, I believe, right? I think to start off with, this is a question I need to ask to start off with. Growing a measurement business from zero to multi-million ARR in just 2 years is no small feat. I mean, all of us can agree to that. So, what were the key decisions that made that kind of growth possible?
Well, I think you start with a couple of things. I think some of it was definitely right place, right time, right? When TikTok came to us in 2020, they had a concrete problem, which is at least US advertisers didn't trust the content on their platform to be acceptable for their brand. And we were uniquely positioned to help solve that because of all the data science and machine learning and engineering and product we had built up until then for YouTube was directly applicable to what was happening on TikTok. And so we were fortunate to win that business, the first ever measurement vendor on TikTok. And we did parlay that into being the first ever measurement vendor on Meta. So we had a lot of early tailwinds, basically being the only solution. And we won in main part because of our technical prowess, because we were able to build a classification system that was similar to how the platforms did it. We use human review and then we do scaled machine learning on top of that, but still aligned with our brand's preferences. So basically taking the brands, what they wanted to understand about content and putting that through the engineering initiatives and culture and know-how that was developed by, some of the best classification models in the world, and then really bringing that to market. So I think you combine that first to market with solving a real need that brands have and something that they've experienced, they have verification budgets that for years they've had. So it's more about applying those budgets that already exist to a problem that they know they have and us being there at the right place, right time.
That's really interesting. Now, as soon as these questions came, so this question is particularly something I was interested in wanting to understand what's your opinion. So looking back, Jon, what felt harder? Building something entirely from scratch or turning responsible AI into a product that companies were actually willing to pay for?
I think the 0 to 1 step is always so hard. In hindsight, we just built these things and it magically worked. Obviously, that didn't happen, right? You have so many fits and starts and things that maybe work but are too expensive or don't work at all, and trying to figure that out. And then also the value alignment with the customers and the platforms is really hard because they don't necessarily want the same thing, right? And figuring out how to take what the brands need and work with the platforms in such a way that we don't overly disparage the platforms, but that we can meet the brands with something that's really hard. That's not just it is a technical problem, but it's also a BD problem, a sales problem, a marketing problem, all of which we had to figure out how to overcome.
Got it. Got it. I'm pretty sure that's been a roller coaster, right? Anyways, right? Got it. So, in terms of the next one, I wanted to understand is we usually tend to worry about AI giving incorrect answers. I mean, I do as well sometimes, to be honest. So, why is it such a problem when AI systems, don't know or don't admit that they might be wrong?
So, first of all, you should worry about AI giving incorrect answers. And I think that's important. And when we think about this notion of correctness, right? Correctness appeals to some higher order truth that may exist, may not exist. But really, the crux of what we were looking at is this notion of confidence, right? And so, AI systems, and we can talk about how, are trained to emulate human behavior, and humans don't like or do like confidence, right? Don't like things that are unconfident. And so the models themselves, as a reflection of us, give confident answers even when they may not be confident. And so that's really what we're interested in, is this idea of, can we extract from the model this notion of confidence so that we can apply it, in our case, a particular business problem, but more generally, there's lots of problems where you actually want that confidence signal to come from the model so you can take other actions as a result of it.
Got it. And this is exactly this confidence that we are speaking about stems the next question. As you rightly said, AI models are trained to sound confident, right? But because they're trained to sound confident, let's be honest, humans don't like uncertainty, right? But somewhere along the way, what happened is confidence became a risk. So how did we accidentally turn confidence into a liability?
Yeah. So when you look at training large language models, there's
Mm-hmm.
two main phases. There's pre-training and post-training. And pre-training, I'm going to wave my hands here, is where you send the internet to the model and you say, hey, model, here's all knowledge that we could find across the internet, across text, images, video, audio, any
Mm-hmm.
modality you can find. And then that model, because it's gigantic, is able to absorb that knowledge and compress it into a representation that it can then use to complete tokens that you give it. So you prompt it with some tokens, it completes, right? It is not particularly useful then, because it's literally just regurgitating the internet. So what the foundational lab said is, we're going to do a post-training step. And we're going to do a post-training step to take this raw information machine and turn it into an assistant, right? And if you actually use the APIs from OpenAI or from Anthropic, there's actually a role called assistant, because that's what the model is designed to do. And in that process, what they do is something called RLHF, or reinforcement learning from human feedback. And in a nutshell, what they try and do is say, we are going to have what's called the base model, the pre-trained model, output multiple responses to given human input. And the human's going to say, I prefer this one, or I prefer this one, or I prefer this one. And what that does is train what's called a reward model on human preferences, hence human feedback. They align the model to generate answers that more humans prefer, right? And if you do this across a variety of domains, you end up with a model that sounds humanistic, but you get all of the other human biases and, human stuff in that reward model. And one of the things that we know is that we don't like answers that aren't confident. And I always have a motivating example here. If you go to two doctors and one says you don't have cancer and one says I'm 99.9% sure you don't have cancer, you probably like that first doctor better, even if that second doctor's answer is actually more accurate and you would prefer going to that first doctor.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I can relate to that. So, John, here's something I actually keep thinking about, right? So, is the industry better right now at automating decisions, or is it better at deciding when not to automate?
Interesting. So I think that where you have this massive push to automate as much as possible, right? And in my career, as a software engineer for many, many years, that's what my job would be. It would be to understand what the customer wants and then automate it. So I
Mhm.
think that you're seeing that continue. Where I think that we're starting to struggle is software is turning from a deterministic to a probabilistic problem, right? Deterministic software means when you give it the same input, you always get the same output. I don't want to say all of SaaS, a lot of SaaS has been built into this idea of determinism. Well, all of a sudden
Mhm.
now we have these probabilistic models, which are probably correct, but they don't necessarily expose their level of how correct they think they are. And so you end up in this interesting dichotomy where they can do a lot of things well, right? I'm not going to say that they don't, but they do have blind spots, whether that's because they haven't seen it in their training data or they don't have it available in their context window or for whatever reason. And we are still in the infancy of figuring out how to take that probably correct automation and turn it into something that's reliable enough for the given domain, where enough varies, right? If you're in the law, probably need to have a higher bar of correctness than if you're in advertising, where you might need a lower bar of correctness, right, in order to be useful for the business process.
Got it. Now, let's talk about some challenges. Let's talk about escalations. When AI hands something over to a human, how do you prevent escalations from becoming either, too rare or so frequent that automation becomes kind of pointless?
Yeah, so this is something we actively studied in our recent research that was published. Is basically, we don't necessarily think of it as a problem of whether the events are too rare or not. We think of it more as a priority queue. So what we did is we took the output of an LLM that was given a policy and a piece of content, and it said, does this piece of content violate this policy, yes or no? And then we extracted a bunch of metadata underneath the hood and said, hey, can we use this metadata to train another model to output a trustworthiness score? So it's not saying whether the LLM was right or wrong. It's saying, should you trust the LLM or not? And then that was used as a ranking function for our human review staff. So the idea is it's not about over under escalating. It's more, we're going to create a priority queue of everything, right, that we run through the LLM. And then we figure out how much we can afford to go and adjudicate with human review. And that human review really helps us decide whether the problem is kind of in one of three classes. One, the LM just got it wrong. It happens, right? And there's really no change to be made necessarily, except trying a bigger model or lowering the temperature or whatever the case may be. The other one is the policy is underspecified. So this piece of content is well understood, but the policy is a borderline case. So an example might be here, if the policy was just, is somebody committing a crime in a YouTube video, and the video is somebody playing a game of Grand Theft Auto and stealing a car. It's very clear what the content is, but the policy is underspecified. Is it a crime? Well, yes, but it's not real life. So I model here, don't know what to do. The other is where the content is unclear. So the content is like, adult content's a great example. It's like, gosh, it's like on the line and it's blurry and all this kind of stuff, or there's like euphemisms or, implied stuff. That's where the content really isn't clear. And so the result is usually better policy, but it is important to disambiguate those two answers so that our policy can continue to get better where it needs to get better.
Makes perfect sense. We just spoke about LLM models as well, right? So some of the most difficult scenarios involve cultural nuance or trying to interpret intent. So why do these gray areas expose the limits of even the most advanced LLM models?
Gosh, I come back down to policy, right? And what I found through my recent research is that the better the model is, the better it is at following what you told it to do, whatever that may be, right? And so when your policy is underspecified for whatever reason, right, it doesn't consider this cultural nuance or whatever, the model doesn't know what to do, and it's not an AI problem, right? Because it's not specified how it should behave in a certain situation via the context you gave it, right? I keep using the word policy, but that's synonymous with context for the purpose of LM discussion. And so what we have to be able to do is figure out for that content that is ambiguous, whether it's cultural nuance or whatever, how do we make the policy better? Now, there is a separate bucket around, does the model speak the language? And we found that not all models speak all languages, right? And so that is something that we have to solve either with translation models somewhere in the pipeline or working with different foundational vendors that understand those languages separately, right?
Got it. Got it. Now, in terms of measuring, systems, John, when we measure AI systems, accuracy is usually the headline number. How should teams rethink success metrics for AI moderation? Is accuracy enough, or do we need something more nuanced?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about accuracy, right? Really simple definition, total correct over total observed, right? When we think about quality, we focus more on precision and recall and the trade-off between the two. So precision is of all the things you classified as about it, how accurate are you? And recall is of all the universe of possible positive, of actual positives, how many did you find? And creating that balance between those two is really important for our particular domain. What I would advise is the days of very, very, very large evaluation sets being necessary are probably getting behind us. And instead, teams should focus on smaller, highly targeted evaluation sets. So there's a branch of machine learning called active learning. And the idea behind active learning is you're trying to pick examples to test the model in a particular way, given previous information you have about the model. So we spend time on active learning so we can make sure our evaluation set really tests the things that we care about. Now, you end up in this weird loop where you can't have the evaluation set leak into the training time. And so trying how to solve this information leak is an active problem, but I would tell teams focus more on a really, really, really highly curated and maybe smaller evaluation set than a very, very large kind of correct evaluation set.
Makes perfect sense, got that one.
Yeah.
Now, we spoke about challenges, we spoke about escalations. Let's talk about trust.
Mhm.
How do AI model risks affect user trust? Especially when people can't tell whether a decision came from a human or a model.
That is a deep question, right? And I think a lot of it, I think there's like multiple layers you can answer here. Like I get up and I read Reddit in bed in the morning and I read the little machine learning blogs. And depending on which subreddit you're on, it's either very technical and about all the different things, or it's some super hype thing about AI is going to destroy the world. And just yesterday, a report was released that caused the markets to go down by a bunch because of, LM or AI doomerism. So it's really hard to figure out what to trust, right? And so that's why I come back to, I spend so much of my time on evals, right? I was playing with Claude Code 2 days ago, and I got it to a situation where I was like, did you really, do what I said you did? And it goes, you got me, I didn't. And this was the latest model, Opus 4.6, thinking whatever, 2 days ago. So that's going to happen. But because I know my domain and I know the problem I'm trying to solve, I'm able to detect that very early, and I corrected it, right? And not a problem. But where we get into trouble is where we don't take evaluation seriously and we just say, oh, we're just going to build a chatbot and put it in the wild and it's going to be great. You're going to lose a lot of trust with your users, I think, quickly, right? Because as LLM hype starts to plateau in the Gartner hype cycle, which it will, I don't know when, but it will, you're going to end up with the differentiator being solving a real problem. And to me, that comes down to the quality of the predictions.
Got it. Now, lastly, I just want to understand, John, looking ahead, I have to ask this. Do you think future AI systems will get better at recognizing their own limits? Or will humans always need to stay in the loop?
I don't know that humans will always need to stay in the loop that they're in now. So the way that I like to think about this is a concentric circles where there are various loops, right? So you think now humans are, at least in our processes, very involved in some of the smaller loops, but not the smallest. We still have LLMs that grade our distilled models. And that loop works pretty well, right? We still have to have humans come in and adjust the policy and choose different models, that kind of stuff. But you can imagine a future where humans are more and more removed because the models have both the context they need and are really good at following instructions, right? So will we get to a world where you just declare I'm hungry and food shows up at your door? Yes, probably. But is it going to happen in the next 2 years? I don't think so, because I think you're going to deal with too many misses on, oh, it's the wrong credit card, it's the wrong store, you didn't account for my allergies, you didn't account for, my preferences or whatever, not because the model's incapable, but because the information wasn't delivered to the model.
Makes perfect sense. And I'm looking for a day, I'm probably wondering if that holds true for me because I am thinking about food, and if food arrives at my door, that will be like a bliss for me, to be honest. So kind of waiting for that day, right? And all of us do, whenever you're hungry and just food arrives. I mean, that everyone for that day. So, well,
World of autonomous driving, there's no humans at all.
absolutely, we've almost been there right now. Obviously, there are some permutations and combinations out there. There are some adverse effects to that as well, and we've kind of achieved that. So I don't think we're far away from reaching out to a place where we think about something and voila, we have it right away, right? So quite a possibility, as you rightly said.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, really enjoyed hosting you on our podcast, John. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed you hosting on our podcast Tuesdays with Trailblazers. And thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, stay tuned with AdTech Edge for more insights. Till we meet again, signing off, your host, Siddesh.